Hi, Jason Harris.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you so much for having me
Yeah.
in your New York City office. It's
Yeah.
really big.
Yeah, it's a big office.
It kept going when they were leading me back here.
Yeah, it's really pricey too.
I'm
yeah,
sure,
it's
in New York.
stressful, you know. Yeah.
How many people are you working here?
We're like about 100,
wow.
but we moved offices like 3 times, so I wanted to overdo it because every time you move, it's a pain. So I kind of went bigger than I needed to.
Okay.
Try to grow into it.
And you have multiple locations, right?
Yeah, we got 4 offices. We started in San Francisco,
Okay.
and then New York was second, and then we opened Chicago and then Seattle.
Great. So how many people are you
We're
employing
like 200
altogether?
something.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's good.
And I saw on your social media that you do this annual retreat you just mentioned.
Yeah, it's our
where you take
Mechanism
everyone-
Summit, yeah.
So tell me, what is that about?
So we get all 4 offices together because they'll talk on the phone or video conference, but they never really interact all together.
Okay.
And so it's easier to fly everyone to one location versus having people travel to the different offices. And so we all come together once a year and sort of align our goals for the next year. We talk about what we accomplished the year before, and then we do like various events. Like we did Color Wars this year, so it was like a camp theme. So everyone like got tapped into their camp kid, and they had different colors, and we did like a Color Wars with like dodgeball, tug of war, potato sack races. It was fun. And then we all have dinner together, and the idea is to interact with people that you don't know and try to sort of break up that, these are my 3 friends from work I hang out with, and make people interact with each other. So yeah, it's really good.
Great.
It's fun. Yeah.
Does everyone come back to the office feeling refreshed and like?
Yeah, they're motivated for like 2 months, and then
and then they need another one.
And then they need another one. But yeah, so but it gets everyone really inspired, and it feels like a community again.
Love that.
Yeah, it's good.
Cool. So you are the co-founder and CEO of Mekanism.
Yeah.
You're also the co-founder of the Creative Alliance. You're on the global board of directors for Advertising Week. You're on the board of directors for the United Social Impact Leadership Council, and you're the author of The Soulful Art of Persuasion, which I can't wait to talk to you more about.
Awesome. Yeah.
I'm always so curious about how successful CEOs like yourself get started and have flourished, So let's start with where you grew up and how you grew up and
yeah, sure. My background. So I grew up in the suburbs of DC in Virginia. Yep.
I grew up in the suburbs of DC also.
Oh, really?
Maryland.
Really? What?
Like Potomac, Maryland.
Potomac? Yeah. I so many people from Potomac.
It's so fun.
So I was in Springfield, Virginia.
You're
so
kidding.
Fairfax County, and I would never live there now. Would you? No way. Yeah, of course. A lot of people think that.
It's great. I appreciate it for what it is.
I appreciate it too, but it's a very different world. But both my parents were teachers, and so they were real academics and intellectuals, and they read all the time. And that was sort of the way they experienced the world, was through books. And I was much more of a experience through getting into trouble and taking risks, and I wasn't much of a bookworm when I was a kid. But I did love watching TV. I did watch like a lot of TV. I listen to music and watch TV. Those are kind of like my 2 big influences. And I would always watch TV, and I'd look at the ads. So when I was growing up, like the Kool-Aid ad was like my favorite ad, and we're like, he just like busts through the wall,
Yeah.
They're like, hey, Kool-Aid, and he like breaks up the school dance, and he like ruins the school, and then they drink sugar water and get hopped up. And I don't know, I always loved the Kool-Aid Man, and like Lego My Ego, anything with like a famous like catchy phrase. And so I'd watched a lot of TV, and I would always like sort of in my mind, I was like probably 12 or 13, I would like dissect the ads that I liked. And then it dawned on me at a pretty young age that people can do that for a living. Like they can actually, someone has a job making those ads.
How old were you when that dawned on
Yeah, like
you?
12 or 13.
Oh, wow.
Like for a long time I knew what I wanted to do.
Cool.
And I don't know why I didn't think about movies or television or entertainment. I just was always into the ads for some reason. And so I knew, even when I went to college which I went to college for econ, which I did for my parents, but I was never going to use it. And just always knew, like right out of college, I went into advertising. So I always wanted I always knew what I wanted to do. And early on, I knew I'd want to start my own thing. So that's kind of unusual. You know,
That
a lot
is
of
kind of unusual.
a lot of paths meander, or someone falls into something just by contacts or where they end up. But I sort of like was dead set on it.
Laser
Yeah,
focused.
at a young age.
Yeah, I feel like also a lot of people have a similar story. As a child, people kind of know what they're passionate about and know what they would be good at.
Yeah.
But like you said, like your parents influence like what you're going to do or what you think you have to do or what you have to go to school for, and kind of society kind of molds you that way as well. So it's awesome that you actually were able to cut through all of that.
Yeah, I was. But in hindsight, you know, I sort of got the degree because my parents were paying for my school. I was very fortunate that way. But it wasn't something I was interested in. You know? Like, I don't know what you studied or in school, but I was, you know, doing like stats and, you know, macroeconomics, and none of it. It just like went in and went out, took the test, and that was it, you know?
Totally.
But I wish I like studied, you know, I don't know, art history I was really into. But I think also when you're in school, you should study whatever your interests are, because it doesn't really matter what your degree
Couldn't
is.
agree
You know?
more. It's so true.
But no one tells you that.
No one tells you that at the
You know,
beginning.
they think it's like sets you on a path, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, going to school in general, I think is valuable because you learn like the systems. Like for me, school was almost like, how do I get through this system so I get like a passing enough grade and can continue, you know, to have these certificates that I need to do my life,
like,
kind of thing.
Yeah, and it teaches you discipline
and these things,
social interaction and things like that. But there's not those classes that you took that, you know, you remember. Like I don't remember advanced accounting or you know what I mean? Yeah.
So what was your first job in advertising?
So my first job out of college, I couldn't land. It's not always that easy to get into advertising, so I couldn't land like my dream job at like a great creative agency. So I sort of got my first job through a friend at a promotions agency. So we would do, it was for Miller Coors, which actually is one of our clients today, which is kind of ironic. We would do like, you know, if you go to like a Vons or one of those supermarkets, I don't know if they do that anymore, but they would have like big inflatable blow-ups of whatever new product came out, you know, and they would give you like, it's like kind of like sampling or I guess it's in a way, it's like promotional advertising. So you'd go to different places, and we had these huge Miller trucks, and we would set up and have a DJ and like have these big inflatables, and we would be trying to sell, you know, the Miller dream. So I did that. I was like organizing all these trucks. But so I went from promotions, then I got a job at a design firm, which was neither of those were where I wanted to go, but it was like trying to get on my path to get to an advertising agency that did, you know, ads. Ad ads. Yeah.
And ads, like you guys specialize in what, digital ads?
We do a lot of social media. We do a ton of television still. Like television ads, surprisingly, are still a big business. And we do outdoor, we do, I mean, you name it, branded content, we do film, we do, you know, video content. So really anything under the sun at this point,
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Do you have like a money spot? Like, is there something that you find is like your, you know, your bread and butter, something that you're like the best at?
I think we really are good at mirroring like strategy and creative together. So what the brand wants to become, we help sort of define the brand positioning, where the white space is for that brand, what they can own strategically, and then bring that to life through big creative ideas. And then we can execute those ideas on really any level or any platform. But we always believe that one big holistic idea of what the brand stands for, the reason for being, you know, the soul of the brand, we define that and then bring it to life, and then work for this, you know, hopefully work for the same client for years and years to bring it to life.
Awesome. What do you think it takes for someone to become a CEO of an agency like Mekanism?
So, like any CEO or particularly in advertising, do you think?
Let's start with advertising.
With advertising,
Yeah.
I think really understanding. I was fortunate because I worked in a lot of different areas of the business, so I understood, new business, how to pitch, and win or lose business. I understood production. I knew a bit about strategy. So I worked in different disciplines, how to manage relationships, and so I think it doesn't always happen that way, but having knowledge from different disciplines within advertising really helps. And then I think having an understanding of good work and what makes good work, and then how to build relationships with clients, sort of those are, I think, the key. And then how to motivate. Obviously, part of any CEO's job is coming up with a vision and motivating the team and feel like everyone's working through the shared vision, and then outlining cultural values, and then making sure those values permeate throughout the agency. Because without those values and having those values on paper and living those and embodying those and reiterating those over and over, it becomes like the culture becomes lukewarm. And they always say culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think in building a business, the CEO's job is to keep that culture alive and vibrant.
How would you describe your culture here at Mechanism?
Well, we have a list of, and everyone gets like a book when they start. And every internal meeting, we reiterate the values. But there's not sort of one thing that holds it together. But the type of people we want to hire are creative entrepreneurs. So they have because we're an independent agency, so we're not owned by anyone. So everyone has to feel like they're not a cog in the wheel, but they have ownership. So they have to feel like entrepreneurs themselves. And then really the creative means that they're really all about the end product and what we put out into the world. And they have to love creativity, not just getting the job done. So that's sort of the type of people that we attract and look for, screen for. And then our values are optimism, fearlessness, we're realistic, collaborative. So those are sort of the key ones that we define. And we want people that are optimistic in spirit. They aren't afraid to speak up. They aren't afraid to pitch crazy ideas. They're also realistic. We have to improve and sell products and services.
Right.
So we have to make sure that the work we do is working. And then collaboration is really important. Just feeling like you're part of a team. Everyone's contributing ideas. There's no ego or politics, things like that. Which, you have to manage through a lot to keep those values alive.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
What are your biggest challenges that you face as a leader?
In life? Oh.
Yeah.
As a leader? In advertising today, talent is really hard to maintain because in any service-based industry, all you are is the people that you hire. That's what makes the company. You're just really, in a way, a talent agency. It's how the people come together and work, but it's the individual people that make the company. And with, Apple and Facebook and Google and brands building a lot of in-house agencies and throwing money at people, it's really hard to always maintain the best talent because they might just go where the money is. But you have to hold on to that talent, make them feel respected and appreciated, and you might not be able to match them dollar for dollar on salary. So you have to offer them a different work environment or not feel like they're just one in 7,000 people. But maintaining talent's probably the hardest part of the job, I would say.
Makes sense. And do you offer them, would you say that your culture is something that's more appealing to them than necessarily another company throwing dollars at them?
Definitely. Like culture and then variety. So we have like 32 clients, I think.
Oh, wow.
And so you can work on different clients. We do a lot of nonprofit work. So I think that is how we try to keep our edge. But, sometimes the almighty dollar wins out, and we're not Facebook or Google. So we have to compete on culture.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of the nonprofits, tell me about your work with the United Nations. What is the UN Social Impact Leadership Council that you're a part of, and what exactly do you do?
So that's a council that it's really designed for the Sustainable Development Goals and really helping make sure that those have an impact in the world. And, for our part, we created campaign around it, and do you know the Sustainable Development Goals?
I've heard a little bit
Yeah,
about
so I think
it.
that's how everyone is.
Okay.
It's like they kind of know them, but they don't really know them. So every 13 years, there's a new sort of mandate by 193 countries around the world that agree on what the most important things are for the future of the world. And they come up with, like, they were called the millennial goals before. Now they're called the Sustainable Development Goals. So they come out with new ones.
Okay.
And this year, this period, there's 17 of them. So it's like end poverty, climate change. So there's a whole list of them. And it's confusing. It's hard to understand. It's hard to figure out how any person can make an impact. So we created this campaign to try to explain them to people. And it's great because there's companies all over the world working on the Sustainable Development Goals. But I think our goal is to try to make them more top of mind and impact culture so that people understand what they are and how they can help. But it's cool because it's one of the few things where the whole world comes together to have these
Love
agreements,
that.
which that's what the UN's there for.
Right.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
What is the Creative Alliance that you founded, and why did you found it?
Okay, good question. So the Creative Alliance, there's a period where I know you talk about, you've asked, like, do I feel successful or what is success? And even running an agency, which was always my dream and my goal, while that's rewarding, I still always felt like I was, selling shoes or deodorant or, I don't know, financial services, whatever clients hire us for. And I still felt like that was great and running a company is amazing, but I didn't feel like I was doing much, much to help the world improve. And so the UN came later, but I'd worked on my first nonprofit social good campaign, which was called It's On Us, which is to end sexual assault on college campuses. And we launched that with a Biden and Obama White House. And from there, it was really successful, and it felt really good. Like, people were really proud of the company to be doing something and treat it like a brand. Like, we launched it like a brand.
Wow.
As if we were selling razors. We built a brand that was trying to sell colleges and students on consent and not being bystanders, but we launched it as a brand versus just a PSA where, it's like, don't rape,
Don't rape people.
Right, like, that's bad, but really, how do you help change rape culture and impact? And it was really targeted at men to understand that, their actions matter, or turning a blind cheek matters. And so it was just really, really rewarding. And then from that, other nonprofits would ask us to do work, and I realized that we couldn't. There's only so much free work you can take on and still have a viable business. So, but I wanted to do all that work, and I realized that it scratched an itch for me, where I was at a point in my career where I was sort of down in the dumps.
Looking for fulfillment.
Looking for
in your
fulfillment.
work.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I was looking for fulfillment, and I felt like, great, this is my dream, and I achieved it, but it's a little hollow,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like I was doing anything bigger than myself or my clients. And so from that, it was really rewarding. And then we created the Creative Alliance, which is a consortium of agencies that can do nonprofit work like we had done. And they could also enjoy that experience and use their advertising powers for good. And so we call it the Creative Alliance. And actually today we got our 100th agency, so it's massive. There's like
congrats.
there's like 100 companies in it.
I had no idea
Yeah,
it was so big.
Yeah, it's big.
Wow.
So we do a lot on anti-hate and discrimination, access to education in college. We do gender equality. We do civic engagement, which is really about getting people to come out and vote. So it's been awesome.
That's really awesome.
So that balances out, like I can sell ice cream and, you know.
and still feel good
and
at
still
night
feel
when you go to
good.
bed.
Yeah, exactly. And then I can also
amazing.
help run this other thing. So yeah.
So
that's
great.
been cool.
I am so into your book.
Oh yeah, that's
The Soulful
awesome.
Art of Persuasion.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Oh my God, so great. There's a lot I want to ask you about it.
Okay.
But first, what made you want to write this book?
Well, it took me 3 years to do, and I had an idea of, the way I do read a lot. I didn't read when I was younger, but I do read a lot now. And I tend to read a lot of business books, and I had read a lot of business books on, how to be successful and how to sell and how to pitch ideas. And I read a lot of them, and I didn't feel like they spoke to me, and I didn't feel like the tools and tactics they talked about I didn't really do, or I didn't really necessarily believe in. And I thought, I never had put it into a framework, like the way I operate or the way I run my business or sell or have relationships with clients. And I realized that the way I do it is different than what a lot of the books were saying, so it compelled me to try to put it into a formula and a practice. And so that really is why. And this was it took me 3 years to write, but I started thinking about it like 4 years ago. So that was the reason why.
You felt like you needed to put it out there for people.
Yeah, it was also an exercise for myself to understand the way that I conduct business, because I just do it the way I do it, but I never sort of structured it.
Right, you just have to take a step back.
So I took a step back and
see what you're doing.
See what I'm doing, and then organize what are the principles I believe in on that topic, and how do I share those with other people, and then put my beliefs into a book. So yeah, but it was, it's really hard. I don't know if you've ever done that before, tried to write something.
I'm trying to right now, actually. So yeah, it is really challenging.
Yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah.
But once you sort of get the outline and the framework, then you can fill in the ideas you believe in with examples from your own life, or pop culture references, or research and studies. So once you sort of organize your thoughts, then you can kind of fill it in.
That's great advice.
But it's the organizing the principles that's really the hard part.
The hardest part.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
then it sort of flows.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really hard. And then you think it's not good enough, and you have all those doubts, and can I put this out there? Is it going to resonate with people? So you go through a real journey when you're building or launching anything, but particularly a book, because I think it's so personal.
I could totally see that.
But it's rewarding.
Yeah.
It's been good.
In the intro to your book, you mentioned that you've learned to become a persuasive person over the course of 2 decades.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to hear a little bit about what your life and your career were like before becoming this soulfully persuasive person that you are today, and what it took to begin embodying these characteristics that you discuss in the book.
Yeah, so that's a great question. There's sort of 4 founding principles in the book. One is original, which is all about being yourself and leaning into your uniqueness. There's generosity, there's empathy, and then there's this idea of soulfulness. And I think when I started earlier on, I would sort of have my real self and then my work self, and almost like you were putting on a mask or acting, and it didn't necessarily get me that far. Or I just felt like it wasn't me. I was being like a little bit more overly professional and stuffy, and I don't think I let people into who I was, so I didn't make a lot of connections that way.
Interesting.
So I think that was sort of one turning point, was this idea of sort of finding your voice and your beliefs and your vulnerability, and that is what attracts people to want to work with you, not what you think they want you to be.
Absolutely.
And I mean, it seems obvious, but that was like a big breakthrough for me. So
it's one of those things that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Like when you say that, everyone's gonna be like, yeah, of course. But
course.
if they actually looked at themselves, I bet you the majority of people aren't really doing that to their fullest.
Yeah, totally. And embracing your failures and communicating your failures and your successes too. But I think just this idea of leaning into being yourself, whether the outcome's always what you want or not, in the long run will really pay dividends. So I don't think I had like a different work persona. I'm not a naturally generous person, but I am now. Like, I had to train myself habitually to be generous and think about others. And those traits, as I realized I wanted to embody those characteristics personally and professionally, a lot more started happening positively on the career front. And so that's one thing. Like, I think naturally I have sort of the empathetic, soulful part, but this like originality and generous part I had to really learn. And those unlocked when I started thinking that way. It unlocked so much, and it was way more powerful than the way I was operating before.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
How do you train yourself to become more generous if you're not naturally that way?
That's a good question. I think it's, my idea of generosity is really this idea of trying to give something away at every moment, like at every interaction. And that can be your time or your advice or your compassion. It can be stuff. It can be giving away things. But training yourself to think about every opportunity as a way to be a generous person. And it doesn't have to be burdensome, like it doesn't have to bring you back. It can be really simple things. But I used to, work myself and not have time for other people, or if someone asked my advice, I would not have time for them. Or if someone emailed me out of the blue, I wouldn't respond to them because I was just thinking about my day-to-day. And when you create this sort of generosity of spirit, it's hard to explain because you can't measure it. It just unlocks so much.
I know exactly what you mean.
And there's a lot of things now that I do. If I read a great book, I'll buy a second copy, and I'll think of down the road the perfect person to send it to. Or I do that with music a lot. Or sending an email when someone's really into, I don't know, retail experiences, and you read an interesting article and you send it to them.
Right.
Or
could it be like a compliment?
It could be a compliment.
Yeah.
It could be, as long as it's authentic. It could be, someone came out, you heard this podcast about this artist, and this person loves this artist, so you send it to them. Just making sure people are, and you always think to do those things, but a lot of times you don't. Just doing them like instantaneously when you think of it, and you think of how much someone helped you through something, or is a good friend, and just sending those things out, like that generous spirit into the ether, I think is really important. And you start to think that way, and you start to act that way habitually. And oh shit, sorry.
All good.
And you don't have to think about it. That should have been a before taping thing. So that's sort of how I trained to, and it felt good, and I would connect with people in a better way, so I kept doing it.
Yeah, that's the one I have to work on.
But I wasn't I wasn't born that way. I was
Yeah.
born to be like heads down in my own world, and I had to break out of that. Yeah.
Very cool. You touch on I mean, these are great introspective principles. You touch on a lot of them in the book. One of which you mentioned is empathy.
Empathy, yeah.
This is a quality that I think is starting to become discussed a lot more amongst leaders today, because I think it's so important, because it's so misunderstood. You know, a lot of people think that empathy means you have to be nice to people or you're being polite, but it's really so different than that.
Yeah.
Can you explain
what it means to me?
What empathy means to you, and why it's important and valuable to be in persuasion and business?
Sure, yeah. So I think you bring up a really good point, because I think people think empathy is, especially in business, it's like getting the other person to like you. And it's really about, you know, empathy by definition is really about the ability to understand and share other people's feelings, like what they might be going through. That's really at the core of what it is. And I think we live in such an age now where we're really in our own groups and tribes, and we think we're all so different. But we all share, I always talk about this, we all share 99.9% of the same DNA, and there's this 0.1% that makes all of us different. But in our mind, we think, you know, my group is so different than that group, that's different than that group. And I think approaching things that way of we all are going through the same human condition, and we all want the same things out of life, and it just helps you understand someone else's position or perspective. And we tend to, if someone doesn't agree with our approach, whether it's in business or personally, we sort of argue in a way that isn't understanding where they're coming from. And so through asking questions and really understanding what's behind, because if we approach it as like, we basically all think the same way, but we disagree on this thing. What's behind that person's point of view, so I can understand where they're coming from, doesn't mean that I'm going to change my point. Doesn't mean I'm going to persuade them to agree with me. But if I understand where they're coming from and it makes sense to me and I can empathize with it, it definitely goes a long way to like bridging the gap. And I think we're so often, even in business, right? Like we all have clients. Whatever we do, there's clients. And we're so easy to hang up the phone and be like, you know, they're a moron, or they don't get it, or they just don't understand, versus taking the time to uncover what's behind it. Like when we don't sell something or someone doesn't buy something, it's easy to say they're a bad judge of creative, or they don't understand it, or they're not brave enough to do it. But then when you ask the questions, you uncover, you know, maybe they're scared of their boss, or they are on dangerous ground in their work and they don't want to try anything risky, or all they care about is sales numbers because that's where they get their bonus. Whatever you uncover behind it, it then helps you come up with a way to help them understand or get them to your side of the view by understanding where they are, so that you can help sell in that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like a shift in perspective.
Shift in perspective,
right?
Versus like, oh, they don't get it, I'll go around them, or I'll try a different tactic. You got to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, because most people are so closed off. It's like they're lacking that piece that would make things so fluid and so much easier, I think, in life, and not just in so many ways.
And it doesn't mean like you're going to get people to agree with you, and it doesn't mean you're going to change their mind, but it gives you a better opportunity to see where they're coming from by digging a little bit deeper, asking questions, and coming in with that viewpoint like, all right, we all want the same thing, so let's start with that filter, versus we're all so different, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I found this section about the pull of positivity in your book to be really, really interesting. Can you explain a little bit about the dissection of positive versus negative persuasion, and why we should choose to be positive when negative persuasion can be so effective, and we see it being very effective all around us?
Yeah, sure. So there was a There was I'll start with an example of it. So when I did the first social good campaign, it was with Vice President Biden, and we had done a campaign for Axe body spray, which was, I don't know if you remember those.
I do remember.
Yeah. They're like teenage kids, and you spray on the stuff, and then the girls flock to you.
The ads were amazing. It
Yeah.
smelled
I know. It was, well, now you couldn't do ads
amazing.
like that today. But someone on Biden's staff like dug behind some of our work and saw that we had done some work for Axe. And they're like, oh, they know how to talk to college kids, teenagers and college kids. So if they know how that audience, maybe we can get them to flip it and do a campaign to fight sexual assault if those ads were a little like, sexual the other way. And went in and met with Biden, and the way that he sort of sold us on doing free work was not, you're doing this kind of work. Wouldn't it be good to shouldn't you do something positive? Like, how can you live with yourself? Which is almost like a negative approach. But the way he did it was, imagine helping impact a world where freshmen and college women don't have to be scared to walk home at night, or don't have to feel like uncomfortable if they're in a room of men, or that they aren't scared about drinking, or someone's going to put something in their drink, or whatever happens. There's right now, there's 20% of freshmen and sophomore women are sexually assaulted in some way. So it's a crazy statistic.
Yeah, there is.
And the way he told it isn't that depressing, and you should use advertising to do something good for once. He did it in a way that was like, imagine a world that we could help be a part of that was X, Y, and Z. And that positive spin on it, that's what persuaded me. Versus the negative guilt, shame way wouldn't necessarily work. So
you don't think so?
Well, probably would have worked on me, but it's just the difference of making someone, influencing them through a positive lens versus you really shouldn't a shaming lens, and that's sort of the difference. Maybe I would have done it still, but I did it in a way that I had way more pride about it, and I was inspired. I wasn't doing it because I felt, shame or regret, or I wasn't trying to balance out the other work. I was doing it as like a badge of honor.
You got to enjoy the process.
I got to enjoy it. Yeah, and I think that always stuck with me as, pulling people over to your way of thinking is more powerful done in a positive way. It's almost like, your mom saying, it's like, you don't call me enough. You really need to call me. Like, don't you care about me? Like, why don't you call your mother? Versus your mom saying, every chance I get to talk to you, it just brightens my day, and it's so great to talk to you. And, it's like those different things.
Such a good example.
It just attracts you in a way that makes you feel like you want to do it versus they want you to do it. And I think that difference of the pull of the positive and negative, it can be really useful in life and in business. And there's always two ways to do it, and I always opt for the positive outcome.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I really appreciated having you at the Conscious.Enterprises panel this
that
past
was an
fall at
awesome
Advertising
panel.
Week.
Yeah,
it
you
was
did a
so
great
much
job
fun.
with it. Yeah.
And typically, I love showcasing meditation as the primary method for high performers to really introspect.
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting that you actually don't have a regular meditation practice. And I think it's important that people understand that while I think everyone should meditate, I think it makes everyone better at life, it doesn't have to be the only tool for introspection and creating perspective. It can happen many ways.
Yeah.
So what are some of your regular practices for getting in flow and optimizing your performance as a CEO?
That's a good question. What, do you meditate all the time?
All the time.
How often?
Oh my God. If I have time to, I'll do it 2 or 3 times a day, maybe anywhere from 20 to 60 minutes.
20 to 60 minutes?
Yeah, but it didn't start that way. I started with maybe like 5 or 10, and then you build up.
Wow.
Yeah.
I could not imagine doing it for 20 minutes. I tried it. I do it like a couple times a week. I can only do it in the morning, and I do it for like 10 minutes in the morning. And
You do?
I do. I actually I did it like maybe once a week, and then after that panel, it turned me on to a new way to meditate.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, because it was done through music, and it was done through percussive music, and that just made me realize that there's a lot of different ways to meditate,
many ways.
and it doesn't have to be just an app with someone's voice in your head. It can be through music and breath work, and that appealed to me a lot more. But it's really obvious now, but that like helped open my mind to it.
Oh my God, I'm so glad to hear
Yeah,
that.
it was awesome. But I still try to find, even 10 minutes to do it in the morning. But I don't do it every morning, but I do it frequently-ish now. You definitely see a huge difference.
Yes.
In the way, I think for me, starting the day with that makes a massive impact. But I have to, put it in my schedule to do it. But that panel actually helped open me up to that. So that's one thing that I'm doing, but still a novice at. I also work out in the mornings, and for me, doing a lot of boxing activity, while it's not meditative, it helps me shut my brain off.
It's
sort
kind of meditative.
It kind of is.
Most workouts are meditative in some form.
They can be, and it makes me not think about anything else except that activity. So that is really powerful. But again, that's only useful to me in the morning. So those are sort of my morning routines. And then I talked about this on your panel, but I do this gratitude journal I have 2 boys, and we do it once a week. We do it every Thursday night. And I'll set a list of questions. There's always 3 questions, and we write the date down. I write the questions in their journals, and then they answer them, and then we go around. They write them down, and then we go around and answer them. And what's great about that is you can always flip through and see other questions and the way you answered them, so it's always a great refresher. But for me, once a week, there's enough that changes week to week that it makes it powerful. I tried before to like do a daily practice of it.
Yeah, it's hard every
But it
day.
started to get to like, I don't know, today I like ate well. It wasn't as powerful, but the weekly practice of gratitude journaling is you get bigger milestones and information in there. And I think doing it in a group keeps you accountable. And then you get to starts a dialogue versus it being just a quiet, sort of reflective solo experience.
Do you find that you're seeing, it's cool that you do it with your kids,
Yeah.
especially. Do you see their perspectives changing by doing this?
Yeah, I see definitely like the next day. They always wake up in like great moods the next day because that has rewires how you think. And then I think it's really good for goal setting, because some of the questions will be like, what do you want to achieve this week? Or what's one thing you achieved last week? And I think I notice a difference. I should probably try to do it more often, but I've found that we'd stick to. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I think it just matters what you do, that you're consistent with it. And that seems to be working, yeah.
That's a good one.
Boxing, trying to do the meditation more, and gratitude journaling those are kind of the main things when I think about routine.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you touched on how you measure success a little bit when we talked about the Creative Alliance.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself successful today?
In some aspects, I do. I think I am successful in completing. When I have a goal, I can make it happen. I think I'm successful in that way. But I think, so I would say, I think professionally, yes. I think personally I have a lot of growth still to do, and trying to get more in touch with my, it's really hard for me to be a vulnerable person, and that part, and emotional and open up in a way that is sort of deep. I've been really practicing that through a lot of like, I'm doing like this group therapy dynamic where you're talking in front of strangers that you don't know.
What's it called?
It's just called group therapy.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's like a new group, so she calls it new group therapy. It's like the worst name. But it's not some like special handle or practice. But it's been really interesting because you see how strangers you don't know view you, and you see how you impose your views on other people, and then you try to like dig through and get deep with people that you don't know, and
That's
it's
great.
been really awesome. So I think, to answer your question, I'd say yes, fairly successful from a professional standpoint, but I think I still have a lot of personal growth
We all do.
to get. I know, like that'll never end.
Yeah, at least you're
Yeah.
on it. You're on the
Yeah,
track.
I'm trying. Yeah.
How do you see the world evolving 10 years from now, and how do you see yourself contributing to it?
Wow, that's such a broad question. 10 years. I think that we're all becoming more, and younger generations are feeling this. I think we're all becoming much more purpose-oriented, and not just being content with, I have a great friend network, I love my job, but I think there's this movement towards contributing and building legacy and doing more to make the world a little bit better. So I think there's this sort of drive to purpose that is gaining like kind of critical mass with people. Like, what are you doing that's helping the world? Not what are you doing, how much money do you have? Like, not do you have a yacht and a Lamborghini?
Yeah.
But what are you doing that is helping move the world forward? And I think that's so awesome to see. So I feel like in 10 years, that's going to just continue to be sort of the marker of success. And I think everyone's trying to figure out for them what that is.
Great. And,
Yeah.
you're obviously contributing that.
I'm
with a lot
trying.
of your work.
I mean,
Yeah.
I can always do more.
That's fantastic.
What do you think is going to happen in 10 years?
Oh, a lot of things. I mean,
Oh.
I think we're amidst a pretty interesting evolution for sure.
Yeah.
I think that, people are getting more into wellness. We're starting to understand the mind-body connection a lot more.
That's true.
I think in terms of business, what you said is right.
Yeah.
Purpose-driven business
Yeah.
is the only way to go, because I think
Yeah.
eventually, if you're not going to stand for a purpose, consumers are probably going to lose interest pretty quickly.
Definitely. They're expecting you to stand for more.
Yeah, and I think just as a species, as a human race, we're kind of up-leveling a little bit. People are becoming a lot more introspective. I think we're kind of breeding, the next stage of consciousness, from where we went from cavemen to all of a sudden being self-aware. I think there's something else going on now there
which
too.
is great. Yeah,
with the meditation,
which is untapping the mind and the potential. I totally agree. I think
deconstructing reality and all that. Yeah.
I know, and I think there's this interesting I don't really know it that well, but there's this interesting thing of the impact of food on the mind and body, and
Absolutely.
that I think we're like just starting to unlock
Yes.
how critical what we put into our body, and what supplements we use, and how we can sort of modulate the body and our well-being.
100%.
I think we never really saw that connection as much as we are starting to.
Yeah, definitely.
We can heal ourselves,
Yes.
Yeah.
So I have one last question
Okay,
I'd
cool.
like to leave everyone with. What's a valuable piece of advice you'd like to share with other professionals and entrepreneurs?
So I think, you and I as like entrepreneurs, and creating things and, you know, doing what we love. I think whether it's an entrepreneur or someone in any profession, like trying to be successful, I think one thing that I've realized is this idea of playing the long game and realizing that you're impatient. You know, you want the next thing. You want that next marker of success you've set out for yourself. You want to increase your business X%, but that business and entrepreneurship is a marathon, and you don't have to put so much pressure on like, by next year I have to have, you know, it really is a long game. And I think when you play it as a long game and you think about it that way, you're creating a network and building relationships over time. And those relationships, if cultivated, will always pay off. But you don't have to stress about like getting it all done like right now. Like I always try to think about playing the long game and not the short game. And when you act that way, you make different decisions. You're not pushing for a sale you need. When you don't get something, you're not devastated. When you cultivate relationships, even if you don't win something, you're still thinking about that as building a relationship. When you have that mindset, your odds of success are going to be much greater because you're looking at it as a long game and not transaction to transaction. So I think that's like the biggest piece for me that changed my mindset.
Great advice.
Yeah. All right, cool.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Thanks
This
for
was
having
so
me.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was great.